Welcome back, everyone. This is Jensia.
And Wyatt.
Yes, we are back with the Evil Essence podcast
Yep.
for round 2. So hopefully people like the first one. We've got a couple listeners, so we've gotten a little bit of feedback.
I'm going to be the listener again today as Jensia tells me the story, which I have not heard yet.
Yeah,
I don't know what it's even about.
This one is going to be dark.
Darker than the last one?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, they're both very sad, but this one is just it's a whole long story of darkness. Like, this poor woman just went through so much sadness in her life, and then a tragedy happened in her family. It's about to get a little bit sad, but also very interesting, so...
Just one more thing on the topic of spookiness, since that's kind of what this is, and it's the Halloween season and everything. If you're looking for a movie to go see, The Terrifier 3.
Oh god.
It's a fun movie. It doesn't have a lot of story, but it's fun. If you want to go watch a bunch of brutal killings, then do that.
Yeah, it's like a slasher flick.
I mean, yeah, just taken way over the top.
Oh my god. I haven't seen it.
No.
But okay. Anyway, so let's start the story. Yes, it's going to be dark. Maybe I'll just give the trigger warnings for what exactly we're going to be talking about, because there's going to be a very brief mention of sexual assault of a child. And then also there's going to be child murder. I have to warn you about that.
Oh, that is the worst.
That's the worst kind of murder.
Those are boundaries of which shall not be crossed.
Yeah, it's hard to listen to, but it's also a very interesting story. And the people involved deserve to have their story be told, even if it's hard to listen to. So if you're okay with listening to those things, then, continue on. Yeah, so on the morning of October 27th, 2008, in the small town of Littleton, Iowa, a woman named Deb was just relaxing at home after a long overnight shift when she got a frantic knock at her door. So she glanced over towards the door, and there was a badly injured woman covered in dry blood standing there. So she approached the door and slid it open, and the woman just collapsed into her home. She was freezing cold, she was in shock, and Deb helped her inside, wrapping her in blankets to warm her. Deb wasted no time at calling the emergency services. This woman was mumbling to her, but Deb couldn't understand what she was saying. When the emergency services finally arrived, they immediately recognized this woman as a woman who was missing from Coralville, Iowa, which is a suburb of Iowa City. This was 35-year-old Michelle Kehoe. But before we talk about her ordeal, let's talk about Michelle and her family.
Alrighty.
We will start with her parents, because they are a very important part of the story. So Michelle's mother, Marilyn Hoth, was born on September 24th.
Marilyn Hoth or Hoth?
Hoth, like TH.
Oh, okay. THC.
No. But she was born on September 24th of 1952 in the small town of Sumner in Iowa. The Hoths were very involved in all aspects of their community, and they were respected by the town. Marilyn grew up with 4 siblings. She was known to be a shy and sweet girl throughout her childhood, but as she got to high school, she discovered parties and alcohol. It was so much easier for her to be social and make friends when she had had a few drinks. But by the time she reached senior year in 1970, Marilyn had become known for her drinking at parties. She had quickly slipped into an addiction, which was somewhat disguised because, she was 18, 19, and many of her classmates were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it was written off as normal in her mind.
Okay.
Especially in 1970, that was kind of the hippie movement era,
Yeah.
So after graduating high school, Marilyn started working as a secretary in Sumner. She did keep up her drinking habit, which actually led to her meeting Stanley Peters at Snyder's Tap and Pool in Sumner. So Stan Peters was born January 26th of 1951, also in a small town in Iowa. When he and Marilyn met in 1970, Stan would have been 19 and Marilyn 18. So the two of them enjoyed going out together and partying. Just like Marilyn, Stan had become a heavy drinker and had also started taking prescription pills, including stimulants. Marilyn started taking these drugs occasionally as well, and unfortunately there just wasn't much to do in rural Iowa in the 70s. So, a year after meeting, Stan and Marilyn would be married on September 19th of 1971 when he was 20 and she was 19. About 2 years later, they had their first and only child. Michelle Lynn Peters was born on March 27th of 1973. This is the woman we started off with, the one who was missing and then found in Iowa. So Michelle's childhood was turbulent, to say the least.
Okay.
There were many ups and downs. Stan was known to be an amazing father, spending many hours with her, reading stories to her, coloring, and bringing her little gifts. His hands-on approach to parenting was especially impressive since it wasn't very common for fathers in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Back then it was more of a speak only if you're spoken to style of parenting that was prevalent, and our dad can attest to that. So Michelle had a wonderful relationship with her father, but old habits die hard, and Marilyn and Stan still enjoyed going out and having some drinks. Now, though, they would take turns going out. So one parent would stay home with Michelle while the other went out, except for weekends when Stan's family would babysit so that the couple could go out together.
Okay.
So, it seems things are going all right. Marilyn also loved her daughter very much, but she did seem to be struggling more with her alcoholism. As time went on, family and friends around the Peters said that Marilyn seemed to be leaning more and more into the alcohol and drugs of it all, and she started slacking on her responsibilities. The drugs and alcohol were taking more of a toll on her, so there were even some nights where Marilyn didn't come home at all. Not great when you've got a kid.
No.
Stan found himself too busy with work and caring for Michelle to continue going out as often as he had used to. He'd gotten a job with John Deere as a welder, which required a lot of concentration.
John Deere?
Yeah.
Oh, like the company?
Yeah. That's a really great job, a welder.
Yeah, that sounds like a good paying job, too.
He needed his concentration, and he also had a commute to get to work now every day.
The good old commute.
Yeah, you know all about that.
Yeah.
So hangovers were not compatible with this new lifestyle. He was maturing, and he had a daughter to care for, and all of this caused a lot of arguing between the couple. So finally, after 3 years of this and 3 years of Michelle's life, Stan pursued a divorce from Marilyn. Yeah, so 3 years of marriage.
I feel like maybe you don't get married when you're 19 and 20, a year after you've met each other.
To be fair, it's the 70s.
I guess. We've all learned.
The divorce, of course, led to custody hearings concerning Michelle's fate. Stan had his own issues with drugs and alcohol, which he'd been making great progress with, but he was known to be a really great father, and he was employed full-time. Marilyn, on the other hand, was falling apart after the divorce. So many local men testified, it's not funny, but it's like... Many local men testified at the custody hearing that Marilyn drank heavily and would often go home with them after hitting the bars in Sumner. So she's making her way around town.
This divorce should have happened.
Yeah. I don't know if that was starting before the divorce or after, but you know. She's not taking care of her daughter. It's fine if you want to do that and you don't have, a boyfriend, a husband, or like kids to take care of. But, girl, you've got things to do, so.
Yeah.
Anyways, all because of this, custody was awarded to Stan.
Good.
Sole custody, which is insane for 1970. Like, that, still today, divorce courts are often very heavily favoring the woman. So it's pretty crazy, and good, because Michelle had a great life with Stan.
Yeah, I mean, that means it's probably the right decision.
It definitely was.
If they're so confident that 100% custody goes to the father, then that's probably a good thing. Exactly.
So after this decision was made, Stan and Michelle moved about 30 minutes away to Stan's home in Denver, Iowa. So not Denver in Colorado, but a small town called Denver in Iowa. This would cut down his daily commute from 45 minutes to 20 minutes. Also, being in his hometown meant being closer to his side of the family, including his mother, which is Michelle's grandmother, Marie Peters. So Michelle got to spend lots of time with her extended family through these years, and Stan was able to provide a stable home for her. She loved attending church with her family and the rest of the small town community on Sunday mornings. and she really bonded with her grandmother, Marie. And although they lived further apart now, she still visited her mother regularly. When Michelle was 5, and about a year after her parents' divorce went through, her mother, Marilyn, married yet another man named Ricky Harvey in the summer of 1978. So she was 25 and he was 20.
All right.
Her new stepfather, Ricky, also had a son from a previous relationship named Robert. Actually, at the wedding, Robert was the ring bearer and Michelle was the flower girl.
Okay.
Things aren't all bad at this time, all things considered. Both of Michelle's parents had substance abuse issues when they met and in her early childhood, but one had really cleaned up and was taking care of her, and the other was struggling, but Michelle still got to visit her a healthy amount.
Yeah. So, how old is Michelle at this point?
She's 5.
Oh, okay.
So, Michelle's spending lots of time with her family, enjoying her childhood, and starting school. And her mom has moved on, and it looks like her dad would soon too. As we know, Stan Peters worked full-time at his welding job. So Michelle, when she wasn't in school and his family wasn't available, he would sometimes need help looking after her. And that's when Stan met a woman named Lynette, a local babysitter that Michelle loved.
Okay.
So the arrangement was perfect, but Lynette's adult daughter was much closer to Stan's age. Lynette was a bit older, which I couldn't find what her name was in any source, but she and Stan struck up a little bit of a romance, because in June of 1979, when Stan was 28, she informed Stan that she was pregnant with his baby. So this was definitely not planned. This was his babysitter's adult daughter that he has fallen, and they've got something going there.
He's fallen deeply in love with.
Apparently. We don't know her name, but she was the babysitter's daughter, I suppose. This was obviously gonna bring up some conflict for him. He was excited at the prospect of a little brother or sister for Michelle, I bet. I mean, he was an amazing dad already. But the woman that he had gotten pregnant was, again, his babysitter's daughter, and Stan was not sure how Lynette would feel about this. Luckily for Stan, he had previously planned a fishing trip up to Lake of the Woods in Canada. Hello, Canada.
Yes.
With his friend Dennis and cousins Roger and Stephen. So, you don't really need to remember those names, just Stan is Michelle's dad, and he's going on a trip. The way that this was actually planned out, or not planned out, but she, the daughter of the babysitter, informed him that she was pregnant on June 2nd of 1979, and that same day, or I think it was the very next day, was when he was leaving for this pre-planned trip.
Okay.
So he thought of it as the perfect opportunity to kind of let his head clear and decide what he wanted to do about the whole situation.
Okay.
So anyways, the trek from Denver, Iowa to Lake of the Woods, which is just north of the Minnesota border in Ontario, was going to be about 9 hours. So Stan's cousin had a friend who owned a cabin there, which is why they chose to drive all that way. And Stan was driving up with his good friend Dennis, and the rest of the cousins and friends would be meeting them there. So again, June 2nd, 1979, during the drive up, Stan did inform his friend of the pregnancy, but he declined to talk about it any further. He was just like, this is what's happening. He just wanted to put it out there and then kind of get it out of his mind for the next few days. And Stan insisted on driving. He had actually been a truck driver before he was a welder, and he had driven long distances before. Dennis offered to take over and drive part of the journey, but Stan declined. And by 9 p.m. that night, the pair had reached Duluth in Minnesota, which is about 5 hours of the journey behind them.
Okay.
At this point, Dennis suggested that they just stay there and sleep in the car overnight since it was getting late. The two had also been having some drinks along the journey, so not great. Although it was taken a lot less seriously back then, it wasn't the best decision. But we don't know exactly how much Stan had to drink. It could have been like 1 beer or 2, who knows. Yeah. He told Dennis that he'd be fine to drive since he had taken some beaners, and I'm not sure what that is, some kind of drug. I try to find exactly what it is, but I'm not too sure. I think it's a stimulant. So Dennis relented and decided to just take a nap for the rest of the journey, trusting Stan. The two were not wearing seatbelts either, which again was not very common at this point either. It was in Iowa law though, from what I could find. It had been to wear your seatbelt had been a law for about a decade.
Yeah.
So, although people didn't really listen maybe at that point, who knows? About an hour and a half later, and just an hour from the Canadian border, at 10:30 p.m., Dennis was awoken to their car slamming into a truck that was towing a camper. Both vehicles were totaled as a result of the accident, but one lucky thing, the couple in the truck would walk away unharmed, but the same couldn't be said for Stan and Dennis. Both of them were critically injured in the accident and needed life-saving attention immediately. As fate would have it, the car following directly behind Stan and Dennis was occupied by 2 paramedics.
Wow, how lucky is that?
Right? So they were the first on the scene, and the paramedics rushed Stan and Dennis to a small hospital nearby in critical condition. They were later transferred to another bigger hospital. So Dennis, he had suffered a broken jaw and numerous other injuries, including internal ones, and it would take him a year of intense physical therapy before he could function again normally. Stan, Michelle's father, had extensive injuries to the head and neck, 2 places you definitely don't want extensive injuries.
No, those can be some critical injuries.
So Stan sadly passed away from his injuries while in hospital.
Oh.
So that's horrible, but I don't want to place blame on anyone here because I couldn't find any further info on the accident. This is where a newspapers.com subscription would probably help, but I don't have that at the moment, unfortunately. We obviously know that Stan had been drinking and using drugs, but we don't know how intoxicated he was.
Yeah, because I mean, if it was just the tiniest bit, like, you're allowed to have a tiny little bit of alcohol in your blood when you're driving, so I mean...
Exactly, and we don't know, like, he could have fallen asleep at the wheel, because apparently he actually was known for that during his trucking days, falling asleep at the wheel,
Is
so...
that maybe why he wasn't a trucker anymore? Like,
potentially.
at the wheel while you're driving a truck job?
Potentially, but that was just a rumor that was said about him. He was apparently known for that. We don't really know, it's just kind of the talk of the town, I guess. But we don't know. He could have fallen asleep at the wheel. That other truck could have pulled out in front of him randomly. Maybe he was trying to avoid something in the road. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, Stan had his imperfections, and no matter what happened, this is a huge tragedy and loss.
Yeah.
But he was trying. He was working hard to provide for his daughter. He adored her. And I don't know about anyone listening, but we have had family members that have made bad decisions like drinking and driving.
Yeah.
We have a very close family member who got into an accident because of this in the 90s and fortunately walked away uninjured, but it could have easily turned out differently.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that, it's easy to judge and blame and shame when it's not your close family member who's been in the accident.
Yeah.
Just saying. We're just going to continue now.
Judge, blame, and shame.
We're not here to judge anybody except for murderers because fuck them. Mostly.
Mostly.
It's complicated. Anyway,
this one too?
They're all complicated, yeah. Well, this one is. I'm gonna pick someone who's just an asshole so we can just rip on them the whole time.
So you're saying this one's gonna be like the last one where
you
might have
bit,
some sympathy for even though that's terrible to say. Okay, I mean, those aren't as bad because, I feel sad and terrible either way, but at least knowing that the possibility that maybe the murderer wasn't just purely evil. Their intentions maybe necessarily weren't to hurt and kill somebody.
Yeah.
They maybe had some sort of sadness knowing that that's what they did. Like the last case, the Austin, he was upset about what he did, I think.
I think so too. So after learning that her beloved father would never be returning from his supposed to be short fishing trip, Michelle's world crumbled. She was only 6 at this point. Her parents had only separated 3 years earlier, and she had only been living this happy life in Denver with Stan Peters and his family for the last 3 years. Now that life was gone forever. So Michelle remembered attending her father's funeral, which was a closed casket one due to his injuries, obviously.
Yeah.
But she knew it was really her dad by his hands, which she was allowed to see.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. It's sad, but it's a closure at least,
Yeah, all sorts of crazy things run through your mind when something like that happens, to the point where maybe if you don't see any part of them, you're like, oh, is this really them? Like, all sorts of things are going through your mind.
Yeah, especially as a 6-year-old who's still learning what the concept of death even is. Like, I don't think you even really understand at that age.
No.
But now she does, I guess. So, after the trauma of the funeral, Stan's side of the family tried their best to keep custody of Michelle, but their efforts failed, and Michelle was torn away from the life she knew and placed back with her alcoholic mother. Stan's family was defeated, and they helped Michelle to move in with her mother and stepfather, because remember, Michelle's mother Marilyn had married Ricky Harvey pretty recently. Things are not going to be good from here on out. Hi, Jency here. I'm just jumping in to say that for some reason that I cannot fix, the audio is about to get a lot louder, so I wanted to warn you so you can turn down your whatever you're listening on before your eardrums get blown out. So yeah, we're working on it. Thanks. Marilyn had not taken the time without her daughter to get it together and reflect on herself. Instead, she just continued drinking and flaking on her responsibilities. So she and her husband, Ricky, were living in a 1-bedroom apartment back in Sumner at this time.
Okay.
So 6-year-old Michelle has already faced way too much tragedy in her short life, and unfortunately things were only about to get worse. Trigger warning here for sexual abuse of a child, unfortunately. Oh. So we won't go into any detail, but this is part of the story. Since her parents only had 1 bedroom, Michelle's bed was also in the same bedroom. This is when her stepfather started abusing her, and it became a regular part of Michelle's life. On top of that, Michelle was being neglected by her mother, which is probably why she didn't notice what was happening. And the two of them were both verbally abusing Michelle and just neglecting her. The household was very tight on money due to Marilyn and Ricky's addictions. Marilyn would be consistently fired from jobs because she would be too hungover to get to work. Then she'd be unemployed for weeks or months and finally find a job and start the cycle over again. Even when she was employed, Marilyn took care of the home sporadically at best. Michelle would have to provide for herself if she wanted to eat and be clean. And Ricky was known to work for a series of different mechanic shops in the area during this time. So Ricky's a fucking monster, remember that? He's an absolute piece of garbage. Absolute trash.
Ricky's a fucking asshole.
Yeah, fuck him. The sad thing, I don't know how much Marilyn knew of what was going on. She may not have known, or she may have been ignoring it.
Yeah.
But, even with Ricky's income from the mechanic shops, the family was still struggling. Michelle remembered a time when the family's gas was shut off, so they had to use a camping stove to cook their meals. And then Ricky tried to connect a wood-burning stove to the ducts in the home to provide heat. Doesn't sound super safe to me. That sounds like a recipe for gassing yourself to death, but okay.
Yeah, I mean...
These people were on hella drugs. They didn't know.
Maybe that's what he was trying to do.
Possibly. He's fucked up, man. I mean, if he's willing to do that to a child, who the fuck knows?
Yeah.
When the bills got too far overdue, the family would simply move before the landlords and the bill collectors got fed up. And moving constantly for a child is also terribly stressful and traumatic on its own.
Yeah.
So adding everything else that we've learned gives us a very bleak picture of Michelle's childhood.
Yeah, I mean, it started off, with her dad being around fine and everything.
That's the moment everything was just changed for her. That was the start in a series of tragedies in her life. So things continued on like this for the family for several years, unfortunately. So when Michelle was 9 years old, her mother and stepfather gathered up enough money to open an auto body shop. This was in 1982.
Okay, so they've done something.
Yeah, at least they've got it together enough for that.
They're struggling to pay bills week to week, and then they get enough money to open up an auto body shop. Where did that come from?
Well, you might hear a little bit here in a second. So Michelle thought that the Social Security payments she was receiving from her dad, Stan, after his death was what her mom actually used to open this business.
There you go.
So I guess there are some people we can kind of be a dick to in this story. What the fuck? She's just stealing, her child's money to open this fucking business, which is not going to go well. Spoiler alert.
Well, I was going to say, she better hope that this is going to go well, and then she gives Michelle half the share.
Yeah, exactly. But these people are just drug addicts and, like, fucking neglectful abusers, so of course not. Despite the death benefits that Michelle was receiving from Stan, she often appeared to be wearing old and ill-fitting clothing, and she was rarely able to visit Stan's family that she had become so close to. But when she did, they would raise concerns about her well-being and where those benefits were really going. During one visit to her beloved grandmother, Michelle commented how she wished she could have some new clothing for the new school year, so Grandma Marie took Michelle shopping and bought her some nice new clothes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and Marie was concerned, but she didn't feel that she had any right at this point to tell Marilyn and Ricky how to parent. I mean, she obviously didn't know the extent of everything.
Yeah, I mean, those concerns were clearly right, but she didn't have enough information to know.
Exactly.
To be able to step in.
And it must be kind of hard. Like, she's the grandma, and you're trying to take it away from the mother. I mean, that's a tough thing to do. So Marilyn and Ricky made a go of it with their store for the next 4 years. The abuse of Michelle continued throughout all of these years, and she kept it quiet through all of this time. But finally, when Michelle was 12, her parents were forced to close down the store after it had been struggling for some time, and this added more pressure to an already precarious position the family was in. So after closing the shop, the family of 3 would move once again, this time over 5 hours away to Lawson in Missouri, near Ricky's family. So now Michelle was really isolated. There was no more visits to Grandma Marie. Her only solace through all of the abuse and neglect was her studies. She was a very talented student and a very smart girl, and she loved to achieve good grades. It was tough for her to make friends at school, only because she was forced to move so often. But the fact that she would often be seen in torn and tattered clothing didn't really prevent any teasing from her classmates either.
No.
But light teasing was much better than the abuse Michelle was receiving at home, so she preferred being at school. As she entered her teens, Michelle was growing more and more tired of the abuse she was being put through by her stepfather. It became less and less as she got older because he's a sick fuck who's looking for younger individuals.
Yeah.
One night, during a really intense argument with her mom and stepfather, Michelle heard Ricky accusing her mother of all sorts of things and just blaming her for, like, all the problems. At this point, Michelle snapped. She stormed out of her bedroom and she confronted her stepfather in front of her mother about the abuse. Michelle couldn't hold it in anymore after 6 years of abuse. Now, you think Marilyn would kick Ricky out of the home so fast that she didn't even know what happened to him. But instead of protecting her daughter from this fucking creep, Marilyn stayed with Ricky and kicked Michelle out of the home.
What the heck?
Someone needs to get slapped upside the fucking skull.
Yeah. 2 people.
For real.
Marilyn, is that her name, Marilyn?
Yeah.
Marilyn and Ricky.
Yeah.
Ricky Ticky Bobby Wobbin.
Get fucked, both
slapped.
of you. So yeah, she's been holding on to this secret and stifling the pain and trauma for fucking years on her own as a small child, never to say anything. And finally, she's expecting her mother to do what she's supposed to do and, you know, protect her daughter at the very least. That is her only fucking job. But no, Marilyn told her daughter she didn't know who to believe and sent her away. And Ricky denied these allegations, so they are just allegations, but honestly, why would a 12 or 13-year-old make this up? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
I completely believe her. I mean,
yeah, me too.
So, just a couple days after these accusations came to light, Michelle's mother, Marilyn, called her sister Carol to see if she'd take Michelle in. Michelle obviously felt betrayed, abandoned, and totally defeated. She didn't love living with her mom, and she fucking hated Ricky, but she still felt guilty, like all of this was her fault for spilling the beans.
Well,
yeah, and of course it was not her fault.
No.
But I can't imagine how you would feel in this situation. Because now your mother is kicking you out, you have to feel like you've done something wrong.
Yeah, especially when you're just young.
Exactly, she's like 12. So, kids raised in traumatic environments always have that moment where things kind of click, where they realize their mom or their dad isn't the person they need them to be. And it just tears your whole world apart when you realize that not even your mother's love is unconditional. And that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
These are the people you rely on for everything, so that will fuck your psyche. So anyway, Marilyn's sister Carol was happy to take Michelle in, and this actually would be a good change finally for her.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So Marilyn's family was all too familiar with her alcoholism, and they knew Michelle wasn't getting the best of care under her custody. So in the fall of 1986, Michelle was shipped back off to Sumner in Iowa to live with her aunt, uncle, and cousin. And now this is going to be the family that basically raises her for the rest of her life.
Okay.
Carol had a son from a previous relationship named Brian, who was the same age as Michelle, which was 13 at this time. Carol went on to marry a new man named Rick Smith, making her Carol Smith. And finally, Michelle had some semblance of stability in her life for the first time since losing her father. She fit in easily with the Smiths, and she was no longer several hours away from her extended family. Her grandma Marie could visit her again, and she was away from the toxicity of her mother's home. Carol and Rick owned a successful cleaning business, unlike Marilyn and Ricky's business.
Yeah.
Carol and Rick's business was actually successful. And they were known to be very hard workers. Michelle enjoyed her time with the new family. It was a tough transition for her, but, you know, for the past 6 years, she'd basically been left to her own devices. So now it's like rules, 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 when she's never had that.
Yeah, I see.
She was very grateful, though, and she did her best not to complain about anything. 'Cause she was
Yeah, I mean, I'd take some rules
over,
to follow.
Yeah.
Over the
freedom that you don't want. Like, you're a child, you shouldn't have to be making your own lunches. Like, you don't even know what to eat at that age to be healthy.
No, you just at that age I was just
I would have packed like a fucking brownie. I don't know.
Yeah, at that age I was eating a pack of Mr. Noodles at lunch, and
dry Mr. Noodles. That's what I fucking eat.
Yeah, that you don't even no water, no heat. You just
crush it up in the pack and put your seasoning in.
Yeah. And that's not the healthiest lunch.
Not great. But anyways, yeah, Rick and Carol, so her aunt and uncle, who are going to basically be her adoptive parents now, and everything was going better. She was remaining with them for the rest of her childhood. When Michelle was in 9th grade, the Smiths would move for one final time an hour away to the town of Decorah in Iowa, and here Michelle would attend high school along with her cousin Brian.
Yeah, we just recently went to Iowa on a trip to Kansas City.
That's right.
We passed through Iowa.
So Michelle grew very close with her aunt, and eventually she forged a mother-daughter type relationship with her auntie. Marilyn basically never drove up to visit except for special occasions. Like, she came for Michelle's 9th grade confirmation. I don't really know what that is.
I think that's just,
it's
I don't know.
Getting started in 9th grade? I don't know.
Confirmed into 9th grade.
I don't know. Maybe it's something in the States. But the two didn't have much contact after Michelle moved out or was kicked out. So in high school, Michelle, now we get to learn a little bit more about her and like what she likes to do and stuff.
Right.
She was involved in a variety of activities, including theater and band, and she was even actually captain of the flag corps at her school. So she was a flag girl.
Okay.
There was her school was Thomas Roberts High School, and there she started making friends. She began dating a fellow student, a football player named Keith. So he was 1 year older than Michelle, and he obviously graduated a year before her. And he went off to play football and study at Luther College. So Michelle's adoptive parents were a little strict and insisted that she only spend one night per week with her boyfriend.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, I guess so. Fair enough. So it's just different, and also this is in the I guess this is the late 80s, early 90s now. So things were a little bit different. But that put a strain on things, and eventually they did break up. I mean, they're in high school, this happens.
Yeah.
But in the summer of 1991, Michelle graduated at the top of her class from Thomas Roberts. Again, I told you, she's smart.
So things are looking up.
Yeah, exactly. And at this point, she wanted to pursue higher education. Specifically, she wanted to become a physical therapist. So she was an incredibly smart girl. Her IQ tested at 122. Which I have no fucking clue what that means, but it said that is in the top 93% of people. So very smart.
That's pretty good.
Top 93%. So she's the top, yeah.
Top 93%. Isn't that?
I think it means like she's a top 7%. I guess.
Because top 93% would mean you're within 93% of the people.
I don't know. My IQ is like 4, so.
It should be top 7. She's within the top 7% of people.
Hi everyone. I'm stupid.
Joe Biden's in the top 93% of people. Like.
She was smart. I'm not. Moving on. So she started studying at the University of Iowa, 2 hours away from Decorah in Iowa City. So this is kind of where she ends up staying. So she's just moved a lot around Iowa, basically. Small town here, small town there. And then that one stop in Missouri. But she roomed with some of her friends that she met in high school. She effortlessly double majored, which again, I don't know what that means because I didn't go to university. But it sounds hard. It sounds like you're doing 2 majors at once, which...
Sounds harder than a single major, but it doesn't sound harder than a triple major.
It's somewhere in the middle. But she had a GPA of 3.5 while she was at university.
I think I know what that means, actually, for once.
I think, like, the top is 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
4.0. I don't know. we don't like school.
We're showing some great intelligence here.
So things were looking up for Michelle. She had become a very successful young woman, despite everything. Her dad, Stan, would certainly be proud. But the wounds left by her mother's rejection were far from healed. And she did her best to be a good daughter, but also protect herself. Mm-hmm. On one occasion, while she spoke with her mom on the phone in 1992, Marilyn told her that Ricky had been carrying on an affair with another woman, a woman who had children. So Michelle demanded that her mother tell this other woman what Ricky would do to their children. And the abuse that he inflicted upon Michelle was not reserved only for her. She would later say that she had caught him trying to do the same thing to a neighborhood girl when she was younger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so once a pedo, always a fucking pedo.
Yeah.
And Michelle knew this, and she wanted to save another child and family from that same trauma and devastation, but Marilyn refused to tell the family. But she did file for divorce from Ricky finally after 14 years of marriage. It would be years before Michelle would hear from her mother again. While at university, Michelle started dating another student that lived in close proximity to her on campus. But after some time of dating, Michelle realized this guy was not very motivated or hardworking like she was. Basically, he was a scrub. Michelle said, "We don't want no scrubs." So Michelle had asked him to help her move with her roommate. They were moving dorms, and he said he was too tired. So in 1993, she ended the relationship, and she was still trying to find someone to help her move. So Michelle asked a maintenance man who worked for the complex where they lived, and he was the only person she knew who had a truck to transport the large furniture. This man agreed without hesitation. So we're already off to a good start here. She dumped the last one for being a scrub who won't help her.
Yeah.
This man's name was Gene Kehoe. So if you don't remember from the beginning or you haven't looked at the title of this episode, spoiler alert, Michelle would go on to become Michelle Kehoe. So Gene and Michelle instantly clicked, especially after Michelle had just been in a relationship with a guy that she felt was lazy and unreliable. Gene, by contrast, was incredibly generous with his time and would help anyone in need, including 2 girls who just lived at the building he worked at. It took him a few months to contact her again, but when he did, he called up the 2 roommates to see if either would like to go to a jazz concert with him at the university. Because he worked on the campus, right? They are living in the university. Michelle accepted the invitation, and from then, they were smitten. Gene Kehoe was everything that Michelle had hoped for in a future husband since she was very young. In appearance, he was 6 feet tall with an athletic frame, wore glasses, had dark hair, which was starting to thin out a little.
Glasses, that's a green flag usually.
Gene was 40 years old when he met Michelle, who was 20 in the spring of 1993, so they did have a bit of an age difference between them. But that didn't bother them. They were totally in love, and they're both consenting adults, so good for them. She was looking for a mature man. Gene was the man of her dreams, honestly. He was raised in a hardworking family with Catholic values, just like Michelle. She always enjoyed going to church with her dad and his side of the family, so now Gene and Michelle would go to church together every Sunday. And she also said about Gene, quote, "He had an incredibly strong work ethic. He was a man of great honor and integrity. He was focused and outgoing. He was a man of drive and dedication. That's what she had to say about him. So she obviously very much respected him. Jean and Michelle continued to date and enjoy each other's company while Jean was working and Michelle was finishing up her studies. And in September of 1994, Michelle held a surprise birthday party for Jean's birthday at the local Shakespeare's Tavern.
Oh, that's a pretty cool sounding tavern.
Yeah, I want to go there.
Why don't we have stuff like that in Winnipeg?
Yeah, it's lame here. The story is sweet and simple. Michelle asked Jean to step outside with her for a moment at the party. And then she asked Jean to marry her, and he enthusiastically agreed. She then pulled out this little plastic ring that the two of them had previously, joked with each other, and she put it onto his finger, and they were very happy, and they were going to get married now.
There you go.
Now, anyways, let's talk about Jean Kehoe before he met Michelle. So Jean was born September 11th of 1952 in Iowa City. He was the eldest of 5 siblings to mother Gwen Kehoe and Dorrance Kehoe, who went by Doc. So Doc and Gwen opened up a little grocery store when Jean was just a kid, and he and his 5 siblings were expected to help out around the store. The store was open long hours, so Jean would often come home from school and then work at the family grocery store. His childhood seemed to be pretty normal for the time, nothing I could find to note, but by 1976, when Jean was 23 or 24, the Kehoe family was forced to sell the grocery store after 20 years of business. This was due to new regulations, which would make it impossible to compete with the other stores in the area. Fucking regulations.
COVID?
No, this was in the 60s. Oh, wait, 1976, I just said.
Oh.
So Gwen and Doc went off to work in different places, and things just kept rolling. Doc, and presumably Gwen, went on to retire and enjoy many family functions and relaxing days. In the spring of 1995, Doc would finally pass away at the age of 78. So this brings us back to our timeline. In the fall of 94
Actually, wait.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah. No.
No? Okay, that's it. I'll shut my mouth.
No,
Tape
go.
it shut. This is why I think it's a good thing if you're into experiencing your life and exploring the world and doing things like that. Do it while you're younger, because a teacher of mine told me a story one time of how somebody that he knew had all these big plans to travel and go all these places when he retired. But by the time you get to that age, you never know. And this guy sadly had a heart attack and died just before retirement and never got to do any of those things. So I think make it a point while you're young to do those things. Take time, go live in some cool countries around Europe for a few years,
Absolutely. So yeah, anyways, we're back to 1994. Michelle and Jean get engaged at the birthday party that she set up for him. And 6 months later, in 95, is when Jean's father passed away. This was a little bit of a tough time for them, but he had Michelle with him through it all. And in December of that same year, 95, Michelle completed her bachelor's degree at the University of Iowa, and she was ready to apply for her master's program. But Michelle was conflicted on what she wanted now. She had always dreamed of becoming a physical therapist, but she had also always dreamed of becoming a wife and a mother. And now that she was engaged, the latter dream seemed even more attainable. So Michelle wasn't entirely sure if she still wanted to go for that master's program at this time, or ever. 2 months before Michelle and Jean were set to get married, Michelle's mother, who she still had limited contact with, had moved on to husband number 3 in March of 1996. So this time it was a man named James McMillan, who went by Jim. Michelle was conflicted on whether or not she should invite her mother and her mother's new husband to her wedding that summer, because Marilyn she apparently really wanted to be at her only child's wedding, despite the heaps of trauma that she had caused throughout Michelle's childhood. And Marilyn's side of the family did try to convince Michelle to let her come, and she eventually agreed after they promised they'd watch her and make sure her mother was not fucking ruining her big day by getting drunk or something. So on June 22nd of 1996, Jean and Michelle got married at the Catholic Center at the University of Iowa, which is also where they met, so it's pretty cute. At the university. So Michelle was 24 and Jean was 44, and the day went on without a hitch. Marilyn and Jim did come to the wedding, and they didn't cause any trouble. It all went well. It was a wonderful day. After the ceremony, the couple had a reception, and before they had gotten married, the couple actually purchased a home, and they would move into that home on their wedding night, so they had been working hard in the weeks before to get it all ready.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, after the wedding, they went to Hawaii for their honeymoon. Although the wedding was a wonderful occasion, it was a lot of stress. Like anyone who's gotten married, I'm sure can tell you.
Yeah, I could tell you.
Yeah, like neither of us are married, but like it sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Michelle was kind of struggling. She was a little overwhelmed, but in the fall of 1996, she started to attend her master's program for physical therapy, and she quit the job she had taken in the meantime. She had taken like a job just to, make some money over the summer, I suppose. But after double majoring for the last 4 years and being an overachiever in school basically her whole life, she was becoming a bit exhausted with school. Plus, she was still carrying so much trauma from her childhood, and she'd already gotten a bachelor's degree, so that's impressive. But yeah, things were still tough at times for her. And at 24 years old, the trauma was starting to take a little bit of an effect in her life. As I said before, Michelle began her master's degree in fall of 1996, but she quickly realized it was no longer her passion and there was too much pressure on her, so she had her first nervous breakdown around this time. At this point, she was just feeling so much pressure, and she decided not to even pursue a leave option, and instead she just fully dropped right out of her studies. For the fall semester, she finished all that up, and then she transitioned to the life of a homemaker. So she took some time off from work and school in order to cope with her mental health struggles, but after some time, she was ready to rejoin the workforce. In the winter of 1996, so this is all like happening in 1 year, it's kind of a big year for her. Michelle, she began working as a preschool teacher, which reminded her of her own goal to have children. Now, I need to warn you a little bit here. We are going to be talking about suicide attempt and ideation. From this point going forward, basically, this is going to be a bit of a theme in the story. Okay. So, one night in February of 1998, Gene came home to find his wife nowhere in sight. He searched the whole house for her, and when he couldn't find her, he checked to see if her car was outside, and it wasn't. So the last place to check at the home would be the garage. Inside the garage, Michelle had been sitting in the couple's other vehicle, a truck, where she had been idling the truck in an attempt to end her life from the fumes. So things weren't looking good for her. Michelle had already passed out and was near death's door, but Gene rushed her to the hospital, and she received emergency medical care, which did save her life.
That's good.
Yeah. So she then had to stay in the psychiatric unit of the hospital for how long, I'm not sure. But, she got some help there, which is good. Now, Michelle was said to be very good at hiding the way she was really feeling. Having gone through all the trauma she did, this was probably a sort of trauma response. This is just my theory, but maybe she kept it all inside because the last time that she totally trusted a person and opened up about her pain, she was completely betrayed and abandoned, like when she told her mother what had been happening. So maybe that was kind of a part of it, and maybe she was afraid that Gene would leave her if he knew, like, how she was feeling. There was probably some level of fear of abandonment instilled in her, even if she didn't know it consciously. But either way, things had come finally to a head for Michelle, and the trauma was all coming up. She even said that when she attempted suicide, she could smell her stepfather, the one that abused her. He probably smelled nasty as fuck.
He probably smelled nasty, but tried to mask it with some cologne, so it was a mixture of just...
Yeah, he probably smelled like a fucking sewer.
He probably smelled like
a sewer with a thin layer of cologne over it. It's horrible, but yeah, no, he's nasty. Fuck him. In March of 1999, Michelle was going to unfortunately try once again. It wasn't going to succeed again because clearly we've talked about how she shows up on the doorstep of that woman in the very beginning, which was 2008. In March of 1999, Michelle told her husband she was going to run some errands. She then bought a knife, checked into a hotel room, and planned to end it all. She laid in the bathtub and cut her femoral artery and then waited to just bleed out. But the next morning, she woke up to find herself very much alive. And I guess her blood had clotted, so she must have felt embarrassed or something about this because she lied to Gene at first, and she told him that she was kidnapped. But this lie quickly fell apart. She just admitted the truth, and she checked herself into a psych unit after that. So Jean was relieved that she was, getting help.
Yeah.
After the second attempt, they really took things a lot more seriously, and she was finally getting the help she needed. It wasn't a quick recovery, but gradually with treatment, she improved. She ended up taking about 5 months off of work after her second attempt, and at some point around 1999, she did get her qualifications to become a pharmacy technician, and eventually she began working part-time as one.
That's good.
So therapy and medication seemed to be working well. She wasn't digging into the deeper issues, though. She never really talked about the stuff in her childhood, which was probably still very much haunting her.
So she's like, what, 25 at this point?
Yeah, about that. Maybe a little bit older, actually. But another thing also that happened at this time to note is that she got electroconvulsive therapy. So, electric shock therapy, basically.
Oh, that's something they did back then.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't even that long ago. This was 99, but...
Yeah.
I think they still do it today. I think it's gotten safer, and she said that it basically resulted in her losing a lot of her memories, but life kept moving, and Michelle's suicide attempts grew more and more distant. She was doing better, and Michelle and Jean actually started talking about having a family because she was doing better. Sean Kehoe was born September 4th, 2001. Family was very happy with their new son, and she was, Michelle was kind of thinking about whether or not he would have contact with her own mother. But eventually, actually, with her resentment kind of melting away and she's softening toward her mom, Michelle even invited her mother to a therapy session.
Oh.
So they went to a little therapy. Yeah, exactly.
I think everybody should try a little bit of therapy.
I think so too.
Like, even if you don't really necessarily feel like you need it.
Because sometimes issues are hidden that you don't realize you have. And it can actually help anybody. Like, even just with simple things like, what job should I take? What do you think? Like, having another perspective is good.
I mean, everybody, like, you can be happy, but still, there's times where you're going to be sad or you're going to have a conflict and not really know what to do. And something like talking to somebody else that...
Someone who has, like, no stake in your life,
Yeah.
This is why BetterHelp should probably sponsor us, because we believe in therapy.
Yeah, I'm not going to know what that is, but sure.
What the fuck? You've never heard of BetterHelp? BetterHelp ads are literally everywhere.
I probably see them all the time.
Every fucking YouTuber, doesn't matter who, like, every one of them. Because it's honestly true what they're saying, but anyways. So this therapy session would actually really shift Michelle's perspective on her mother, which began to get a little bit better. Michelle allowed Marilyn to hold her grandson that day after the session, and things would begin to improve microscopically between mother and daughter after this. But for some reason, after this therapy session, Michelle actually stopped going to therapy altogether for about 3 years. Michelle was known to be a great mother, though, and Jean was a great dad. They both loved their son more than anything, and they doted on him. Sean was very well behaved, but on the rare occasion that he would act out, Michelle took it pretty hard. Like, she felt it reflected on her as a parent, just when her son was doing normal kind of acting out as a kid,
Yeah.
So she was just hard on herself. She was a bit of a perfectionist. And a lot of this information comes from Michelle's cousin. Her name is Deb. So she also had children around the same age, and Michelle and Deb would spend time together fairly often. Although Deb did live, like, about 2 hours away. 2001 going forward were some of the best years of Michelle's life. Life still had its hurdles. Michelle actually got pregnant twice in the years following Sean's birth and lost both of the babies to miscarriage. They kept pushing on. Jean and Michelle, they really loved attending yoga and dance classes together. So they liked staying active and healthy and, dedicating that special time just to them.
Yeah.
In 2006, so we've moved forward a few years here, Michelle and Jean found out that they were expecting another child, another little boy. So their first son, Sean, had turned 5 just about a month before, and his little brother was born on October 10th of 2006. So the couple were once again overjoyed with their new baby, and his name was Seth Kehoe. So we have Sean and Seth.
Right.
And Michelle had been, managing her mental health, but unfortunately things were going to get a little bit harder for her. Having a baby releases a lot of hormones in her body, and it can really fuck with your psyche temporarily. So Michelle found herself suffering with some symptoms of postpartum depression.
Okay.
So she was never diagnosed with it from what I could find so far. I'm actually not entirely sure, so I'm going to hold on to that and let you guys know later on. because we are going to be doing another part, at least one part. It might be two, I'm not sure yet. But anyways, postpartum depression, according to womenshealth.gov, causes a variety of symptoms, including feeling angry, moody, sad, hopeless, guilty, shameful, or worthless. It includes loss of joy, withdrawal from the family and friends, thoughts of harming yourself or even your baby. And this is quite concerning with Michelle's history of self-harm. You know, her suicide attempt. But the messed up thing with postpartum depression is it makes many moms feel guilty and ashamed, like they're bad mothers, if they admit that they're not, you know, super happy with their baby. So although she was struggling, Michelle wasn't totally letting on to how much she was struggling. And she began having these obsessive thoughts about any imperfection she perceived in her own parenting style. Although she spoke with her therapist about her concerns, she didn't go too deep, which was a pattern for her. And Michelle did, however, go back on medication at this time. So throughout her life, she would be going off and on medications a few times, but now she figured she needed it again, like psychiatric medications. So Michelle and Jean settled into their new routine with a new baby and a 5-year-old son. Jean was still working full-time in the same career as he was when he met Michelle, building maintenance. And he was employed at Associated University Realty, so he was building units and maintaining them. Michelle returned part-time to working at the pharmacy because, remember, she'd gotten her pharmacy technician license. And they were both providing for their children. She was taking her meds. Michelle was even known to carry a notebook with her, and she would like write down tips from other moms at the park while their kids played, like parenting tips, what to feed them, the organic foods and stuff that's best. They had a very healthy lifestyle. I actually read that Jean had done marathons at some point and maybe still was doing them. So he was athletic, and then they both liked to go to yoga together. They liked to dance, so they just wanted like a active, healthy lifestyle for their family. In 2007, Michelle's mother, Marilyn, her health was deteriorating quicker and quicker. Marilyn was a lifelong alcoholic, and it was catching up to her. So she was living back in Sumner, where she grew up and where Michelle was born and spent most of her life. People in the town started to notice that Marilyn was taking a turn for the worse. She was emaciated, weak, and unkempt. Apparently, some of the townspeople saw her literally, this is weird, but she was on her hands and knees, just trying to get to the checkout counter with her 12-pack of beer because she was so weak she couldn't, walk anymore.
Really?
Yeah, but she wasn't asking for help, so I can't picture it. She's just, inching toward the counter with her beers because she can't walk there. So that's...
just pushing them on the ground.
I guess so. I'm not sure exactly what they meant by that, but basically she was struggling, and people were like, wow, she is... really gone downhill. That's how weak she was. She couldn't carry her fucking beers. She was struggling. And her apartment was dirty, and she just could not take care of herself any longer. So this is when Michelle's cousin Deb contacted her to say it's time to take Marilyn to the hospital. So there she was diagnosed with liver failure. So this meant she did not have long to live.
Oh, okay.
So Marilyn's family members decided to have her moved to a nursing home where she was soon expected to pass away. Michelle's having a lot of conflicted feelings about this. It's still her mother, right? And now this shocked me when I realized it, but at this point in this story, Marilyn, you'd imagine she's in her 70s or 80s, right? She's in her 50s. In fact, Marilyn, she's dying from liver failure and unable to take care of herself. And that's what drinking has done to her.
Wow.
Because if you think about it, actually, Jean is not much younger than...
no, he's 10 years.
Not even. I think he's a year or two, honestly. But yeah, to put it in perspective, this is what Jean's like at this time in his life, and that's what her mother's like at this time in the life.
Yeah.
So...
That's a good...
Don't be an alcoholic.
Yeah, that's a good example of what previous life choice decisions where they can get you.
Exactly. Jean's happy. He's got his wife. He's got his full-time job. He's got his kids. And Marilyn is dying in the hospital from liver failure.
Yeah.
So yeah, Michelle would have been 34 years old when she got this news. So things have been complicated with her mom, obviously. And although she had been through a lot of trauma, Michelle was still sad. And she wanted to be there in the final weeks of her mother's life. Mm-hmm. So she took all of her holidays that she had banked up at work and spent that time with Marilyn in the hospital. and she helped her mother move all her stuff from that dirty apartment. And then once Marilyn was settled into the nursing home, Michelle, Jean, and the 2 boys would visit every other weekend. Okay. So that's when the family of 4 would stay with Michelle's cousin Deb, who I mentioned. And Deb had several kids and a husband and a nice home, and they were very successful. And Michelle looked up to her a lot, actually, wanted to learn from her. As time went on, months passed, and Marilyn was still hanging on. She wasn't passing away as expected. This was good, but Michelle was now feeling extra stressed because she had made this commitment to drive every other weekend to Sumner to see Marilyn, and she probably felt like she had to be a good daughter. But then her mother wasn't very good to her either, so that's going to cause some resentment to build. Anyway, so Michelle is feeling overwhelmed with everything, and she's dealing with these complex emotions. A common theme with her was being too critical of herself, and now it seems like she's having fears of being a bad daughter as well as a bad mother. To add to the stress in her life, Jean got laid off in November of 2007. So things were getting tough again for the Kehoes, although Jean didn't know how much his wife was actually suffering. But things were about to get a lot worse when Michelle and her boys suffered a terrible accident in the winter of that same year, 2007. On December 14th, Michelle was taking her 2 sons, Sean and Seth, who would have been 6 and 14 months old at this point, to a Christmas story time at the library. She was driving the family's red Volkswagen around 5 or 6 when Seth dropped his soother in the back seat and he started crying. So his older brother Sean tried to get it back for him, but he just couldn't reach. His little arms were too small. Yeah. So Michelle reached her arm back and turned her head for just a split second when she struck a snowbank. And the momentum then sent the vehicle spiraling down the embankment and into an icy river before anyone could understand what even happened.
Wow, just car crashes.
It's taking a turn. Yeah, so she's now in the Iowa River at 5 or 6 p.m., sometime around there. It had already gotten dark outside because it's Iowa in December. So, gets dark here that early too. And it's cold as fuck. It's December in Iowa, and they are in an icy river with their car sinking now. Actually, on that night, it was around minus 9 degrees Celsius, or if you're listening from somewhere else, it was around 16 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's really cold to them.
Yeah.
To us, that's like...
Iowa's not that far away from us, I suppose, but, that's pretty cold. And the roads were very busy at the time because, it's, rush hour. Many people witnessed this accident, which was good because they could rush to help, and the car containing Michelle and her 2 sons was just floating on the river. She tried to figure out what to do next. So she likely wouldn't have been able to swim both of her sons to safety through the icy rushing waters. Just doing that yourself would be a feat. Yeah. This is a river, and it's cold. At this temperature, submerged in water, you'd have mere minutes before hypothermia took effect. Yeah. So luckily, 3 local men who arrived first on the scene were willing to risk their own lives jumping into the water and when they heard Michelle screaming that she had her 2 children and she needed help. Little Sean was only 6 at this time, and he is so impressively smart. His mother is too, so I guess it makes sense. But instead of panicking like most adults would do, like I would probably panic, he, at the age of just 6 years old, had the wherewithal to remember a tip he had seen on TV for what to do when your car is sinking. So Sean told his mom, this little 6-year-old in the back seat tells his mom, you should open the driver's side window. And she listened, she did. And Sean was spot on in this tip because I found from the government of Phoenix a PSA of what to do if your car is sinking. So the first thing is to open your windows, and I believe this is because once your car does fall beneath the surface, the pressure of the water makes it almost impossible to open your doors and escape. Yeah. And then also by that time, your vehicle has probably lost power, and you wouldn't be able to open the windows unless you have a manual system rather than automatic. So a round of applause for Sean, because what a smart kid.
Yeah.
I can't believe that.
That's insane.
So quick thinking. So after rolling down the window at Sean's advice, Michelle unbuckled him from the booster seat and pulled him from the back seat towards the driver's side window. Once she got him there, she held him outside the window above the water, and she dropped him into the water as the first rescuer was kind of getting close to the car. But the rescuer, so the first one, his name is Corey, and he was kind of yelling. He was like, wait, don't drop Sean yet. I'm not quite there. But luckily it was okay. Corey got to Sean. And at this point, his legs were starting to become numb just getting to the car. They already were numbing.
Yeah.
So, and he also had been wearing a heavy coat, which was weighing him down. He was struggling against the river, and he was taking Sean with him to the riverbank. Finally, he made it pretty close, but he was really struggling, so another man jumped in and took Sean. This other man's name was Josh. And Josh took Sean to the surface, and then Corey slowly made his way out too. And then during all of this, Michelle had unbuckled her other son, 1-year-old Seth, and maneuvered him to the driver's side window as well. And the third rescuer, a man named Mark...
Oh, hi, Mark.
Yeah. So yeah, the third rescuer, Mark, then reached the car and took Seth from Michelle, also pulling him to safety on land. And emergency services had been called by this time by the onlookers, so they tried to warm Sean and Seth up while they waited. All things considered, the two boys were relatively unharmed, so the men figured Michelle would likely make it to shore unassisted, so they just kind of stood and watched, and they screamed for her to swim, and they all stood by to make sure that she would make it out okay. But to them, it looked like Michelle froze in fear. She sat in the sinking car, probably in complete shock, and I don't blame her. Eventually, she made her way out, and she got on top of the car, where she hesitated once again. Everyone on shore was begging her to swim for it, but I think maybe she was scared. So the car was quickly going below the surface, and she didn't have much time, so she was forced to jump into the water, and she began swimming for her life. She struggled with the water, and her head went under, and this is when the fourth rescuer, who was just out on a bike ride, like a nice nighttime bike ride, he saw the scene unfolding on the riverbank. His name was Steven, and he had actually been a lifeguard as a teenager. In a crazy twist of fate, listen to this, he had actually rescued 2 people from rivers in the past. 2 people.
He's the river rescuer.
For real.
That should be his nickname.
So all of these happenings were just completely random for him too. Like he was just going about his day when he came across someone who needed rescuing from a river.
You should get a medal of honor.
He did.
The river rescuer.
He got 3 medals actually for all the times he had saved someone.
Yeah.
It's insane. But so by this point, this is his 3rd river rescue, and he's like fucking knows what to do. He's just riding his bike, and he's like, God damn it.
He's rolling up his sleeves like, I have to step in.
Just unzipping his hoodie, he's got his outfit on.
Everybody else is worried and afraid, and he's just like, I know exactly what's about to take place. I know exactly how to fix this.
He's like, let's go, number 3. So anyways, yeah, he knew how to stay calm and help Michelle as well, like to stay calm. Michelle resurfaced a few times and went back under. She was fighting for her life when Steven got to her, and her lips were blue by that point, and her legs were completely numb, so she likely would not have been able to get out of the water herself. So Steven was able to pull her to the shore, telling her they would be okay, and finally Steven and Michelle reached the embankment, and ambulances were waiting there to take Michelle to the hospital to reunite with her boys. So everyone made it out okay in the end.
Good.
Still a traumatic experience, but... So after the incident, Michelle was undoubtedly feeling very guilty. I can't imagine how bad you would feel, especially because she knew she had put 4 innocent men in danger, all the people who jumped in to rescue her and her family. But through all the anguish, she knew that she needed to acknowledge the men for what they had done to save her and her family. She truly felt that if they hadn't acted, it would have been too late for the emergency services to pull them from the sinking car. So if you remember, they didn't really arrive until Michelle was already on top of the car as it had sunk. She nominated all 4 men, Corey, Josh, Mark, and Steven, for Life Saving with Valor awards. And the next month after the incident, in January of 2008, the 4 rescuers were all honored with the awards that they had been nominated for. And Michelle even spoke at the event, continuously thanking them for their help. She still felt truly awful, so speaking at the event was very tough for her.
We're in 2008 now?
Yes.
This is when everything happens, isn't it?
Exactly. So things understandably went downhill for Michelle for the next few months. Jean was there to comfort and reassure her, but she was still seeking help from mental health professionals, but the feelings were a lot for her. She still wasn't digging any deeper than the surface of her trauma, and she had mastered the art of hiding how upset she really was from everyone in her life, including her therapists. So the burden on her shoulders was growing, and all she wanted to do was be a good wife and mother, And she honestly was, but she didn't see it that way, which is very sad. By June of 2008, Michelle and Jean had gone to therapists and psychiatrists together to determine if she should go back on meds, like what's the best action plan for her mental health. And Jean was very supportive. He was a great husband to her. He stood with her through all of this. In other news, Michelle's mom, Marilyn, miraculously recovered from her health woes. Now, it looked like she'd be around for the long haul, which again, on the surface, is a good thing. But Michelle was very overwhelmed by this news because, remember, she had agreed to go and visit her mom like every other weekend.
Yeah.
And packing up 2 small children and driving 2 hours and then driving 2 hours back to your home is not super easy. It's pretty stressful.
No, it's definitely not super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
But especially, like, when you're working, too. Like, that's a lot of stuff to do. And she didn't really want to visit her mom, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine the resentment kind of building up. She really wanted to be a good wife and mother, and now she also wanted to be a good daughter, even though her mother was not really a good mother to her. So yeah, the meds that Michelle went back on didn't seem to be helping her a whole lot, and in fact, the side effects were very intense. She worked closely with mental health professionals, though, to get things under control, and it was just taking some time and some trial and error, trying different meds and stuff. Michelle's cousin Deb tried to help her through this time, too. The two of them would go to church on the weekends because whenever Michelle would drive up to see Marilyn, that's where she would stay with her cousin Deb. Okay. And Jean and the boys would often come with her, too, and stay. So the best way that Deb knew how to help Michelle was through her faith because she was very religious. And Deb recalled Michelle crying her eyes out during these church visits in the summer and the fall of 2008. After church, they go visit Marilyn for a few hours, and it seemed like her life force was just completely drained at this point. That it was the same routine. They'd go to church, she'd cry the whole time until there was nothing left, and then they'd go visit her mom, who was toxic as fuck. So remember that Michelle was a great mother by all accounts, and she doted on her sons, and she loved them. Extended family around the Kehoes noticed that the boys were definitely mama's boys. So in the summer and fall of 2008, Michelle became a little more detached and distant than she had been, and she became slightly more irritable with Sean when she had never been that way before. It seemed like everything was taking a toll on her, and she could no longer tolerate the distressing feelings that she was having. And then another blow to the Kehoe family came on August 25th of 2008. So Jean was very close to his uncle Jack, who we haven't talked about yet. Jack, on August 25th, he lost a battle to his own mental health problems, and he took his life. So this likely brought up some triggering feelings for Michelle and Jean because, it was a decade ago at this point that she had had her last suicide attempt. Yeah. So it's been quite a while, but that's got to be a little triggering for her. Yeah. Now, remember, Jean had been laid off from his job as a maintenance man, and he lost it altogether when it came to 2008. I'm guessing probably due to the whole economic collapse of 2008. So he collected pension for a few months, and now in the summer of 2008, he was once again employed full-time. But during that time, right, he had lots of time off to kind of be with his wife and his kids and, help her with her mental health. And if she wasn't feeling up to it, he could look after the kids for a bit, stuff like that. But now he's back to full-time work.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly, for the money. And, Michelle had been stressed at certain points about money, which they didn't really need to be because Jean actually had a rental property, too, that he was pulling in some money. And even though he had been let go, he was getting his pension in the meantime. So it wasn't all that big of a deal. But, it's a little stressful, right? Mm-hmm. So on Sunday, October 26th of 2008, Michelle set off to visit her mother in Sumner with her 2 boys. Jean stayed home at that time, actually, because he had a yoga workshop that he really wanted to go to. Okay. So that morning, Jean and Michelle had breakfast together. Jean left for yoga, and Michelle let her cousin Deb know that she was on her way to Sumner and she would see her in a few hours. At 11:15 a.m., Michelle left the family home with Sean and Seth. The visit wasn't going to be overnight this time, so when Jean got back from yoga around 12:30, he actually began preparing a roast for dinner that night. Okay. He gave Michelle a quick call just to check in, but she didn't answer. So this wasn't too weird. She had her plate full, taking care of the boys, and driving.
Yeah.
So Jean tried to connect with Michelle a couple more times throughout the afternoon, but again got no response. Later that evening, around 5 or 6, he became concerned when his family did not return for dinner. Since he was getting no response from Michelle, he decided to call the cousin Deb, because that's where she was supposed to be heading.
Yeah.
And Jean's heart dropped when Deb told him that Michelle and the kids had never shown up that day. So here's where we're going to leave off for part 2, because this has been a lot of information to take in.
Yeah.
So we'll let you let your brain relax and absorb everything that's happened. And this is the point where Michelle and her boys go missing. So thank you so much for listening. If you have, it's been a tough one to listen to. I'm aware of that.
A lot of tragedies happening.
A lot of tragedy.
I think we're not even at the worst of it yet.
No, we're not. But I think it's important to learn all about people's history and stuff like that. Not just who they were as a victim, but who they were before that. And hopefully you'll keep listening for part 2. It's going to be probably worse. But yeah, actually a lot of this information I just wanted to mention. I got it from this book, which I've been reading on Kindle. I'm just pulling it up now. So it's called Horror at Hook and Liner.
And it's good to know some backstory of what's going on in these people's lives and what led up to the big moment that made the news that everybody knows about.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
I mean, everybody just hears the story of this person murdered these people, and then you're like...
Everyone,
you're like,
yeah.
Oh, well, that's terrible, but you don't know anything really about
that's
what
exactly
happened.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm doing this deep dive, because this is just I'm only taking a small amount, because I'm not just gonna read this woman's book to you and just take her work, obviously. So I'm just only going over small pieces of information that are in the book, and then also a bunch of articles that I've also read on it. But this book is really good. If you want to learn about it, go into more detail about it. Go read it. It's actually on Kindle Unlimited. That's where I read it. And it's called Horror at Hook and Liner by M.K. Isley? Isel? I don't know. I don't know how you would say that. I'm sorry. But it's a really great book either way. Go read it. It's got so much more detail on everything. If you want to get a super, super in-depth look at the story, because, it's a whole book. We will be back. Don't know exactly when, but...
Be patient with us. We both got full-time jobs. We're working different hours sometimes, different days. It's hard to get together and do this.
All right. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.